Thank you, Bodie, Vlad, and Amanda, very much. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to the Golden Gate Center for Spiritual Living, where we are trying new things. And if you're ready for something new in your life, you're in the right place. Now, if you're here for the very first time this morning, I want to especially welcome you. And you'll see that we've got our two welcome team people up here at the front, and they have a gift for you if you're here for the first time this morning. It's kind of a two-parter. So, they have a welcome packet that gives you some information about us, and inside that you're going to find this blue card. It says welcome right on the top of it. If you fill this out and take it back to the membership table right straight back there, they are going to give you this little book, Nourishing Thoughts. This is little bite-sized bits of positive nourishment that you can use for all different kinds of things that are coming up in your day for yourself and for other people. And I know some people have kept theirs so long it's fallen apart. So this is a great little gift. Be sure to get that. If you are here for the first time this morning, in order to get all these goodies, we have to find you. That's the trick. And so we would like to invite you to just give us a wave. That's all. You don't have to do anything else. Just give us a wave so we can find you. So if you're here for the first time this morning, do that, and our welcome people will find you and give you a packet. And then be sure to fill out your blue card. Here's one right here. Thanks, Mary. Fill out your blue card and take it back to the membership table. And also I want to mention, too, that the February Science of Mind magazine is now available. And that is, Ceci has that over at the AV table over there. And she will happily sell you one for less than $5. So you're in great shape. All right. Are you ready? Okay, good. So, here we go. This is the month of January, the very last Sunday. And our theme for this month is all about God, creation, and you. And so, I want to do a little bit of a review here so that you can see where we've been. So, the first thing that we talked about is that God is all there is. Omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent. Everywhere, all the time. The same for everybody, always. That presence does not stop and leave anybody or anything out. It's all inclusive. That's what omnipresent means. So right where you are that, whether you know it or not. I mean, this is true of everyone, not just those who have that idea. That's the first thing. The second thing is that creative law is impersonal and impartial. It is not self-aware, but it knows how to do what it does. So just like your old VCR, you can put anything into the creative law and it will act upon it no matter what it is, even a peanut butter sandwich. So if you put the wrong thing in as it acts upon you, what you get out may not be what you were expecting. And then last week when Reverend Barbara was here, we talked about the idea that thought is creative, that creative law that flows through us all the time brings forth into our experience according to what our true beliefs are. And when I talk about beliefs, I want to make it clear that I'm not just talking about random things that are amorphous that you subscribe to. That was very complex how I said that. So what I mean is, I'm really talking about deeply held beliefs, things that you don't even know are beliefs because you just think they're the truth. So it's a combination of the thought and the feeling and repetition. You put those three things together, and you get the manifestation in your experience that is most aligned with that. Now today, I'm going to talk about the power of prayer. And the thing about prayer in our teaching is that it isn't about trying to convince God to do anything for us. It really is about shifting the blocks in ourselves out of the way so that what has already been completely given to us is able to be received by us. And we sometimes say in Science of Mind that you can only receive what you can become in consciousness. So that's why I'm saying become what you seek. What it is that we want to be, we need to begin to become before we are that, which seems bizarre. I remember years ago, before I was involved in this teaching at all, I was in a personal growth seminar, one of those things that we all did in the 70s, you know. And this particular personal growth seminar, I learned that it wasn't the world outside of me that was going to give me a happy relationship, a job I loved, abundance, good health, all those things. That I first needed to grow my consciousness into that, and then I would experience those things. And I felt total despair at that idea. Because the idea of shifting my insides seemed so unlikely and impossible to me that I didn't see how that could be done. Can anybody relate to this? Did you ever think about that way? Okay, great. So, let's look at how we got to where we are now. Now, first of all, I want to share a story with you because I like to do this, you know, at the beginning. So an elderly woman was sitting on her front porch in her rocking chair with her old dog next to her, and all of a sudden, a fairy godmother appeared before her and offered to grant her 3 wishes. And so she said, well, I guess I'd like to be rich. And poof, her rocking chair turned into solid gold. And then she said, well, and I wouldn't mind being a young, beautiful princess. Poof, fairy godmother turned the old woman into an exquisitely gorgeous young princess with a crown of precious jewels. And your 3rd wish? Fairy godmother said. And just at that moment, her old dog on the porch uttered a weak sort of whoo. And she said, could you possibly turn my wonderful dog into a handsome prince? And poof, there in front of the beautiful princess stood the most handsome man she had ever seen in her life. More handsome than anybody in here could possibly imagine. He was that gorgeous. And she stared at him in awe, completely smitten. Her knees began to grow weak as he walked toward her and leaned over and just brushed her ear with his lips as he said, I'll bet you're sorry now you ever had me neutered. Yeah, that's iffy, I know, to tell you from up here, but I figured you could take it, yes? So here's the thing. What we manifest in our experience is related to what we did and thought before. And so sometimes what we are experiencing right now is not exactly what we're wanting to go toward. We would like to be more. And so here, what we've got today reflects yesterday's thoughts and beliefs and actions. So what you've done and believed in the last 3 to 6 months, you're now experiencing the results of that in your life now. If you spent the last 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years thinking and acting in a particular way, then probably you really cemented that. Now, one of the things I've talked about before that I want to come back to here is that our brains physically respond to our thoughts as well as our actions. So the way that we develop our habits is by repetition. And the way that we develop our beliefs is by repetition of certain thoughts or ideas and certain feelings and emotions. Are you with me here so far? This is yes. This is what? You okay? Hello, yes? Okay, good. So our physical brain then responds to those repetitions, to those patterns. And it actually forms grooves, I would say, in the physical brain where the neurons fire in the same order repeatedly over and over again to allow us to do something or to think something. And so it becomes easier and easier to do because those neurons get used to going off in a line just like that. So that as soon as the first introductory thing pops into our experience or awareness, automatically we're off to the races doing whatever it is that our habit is. Are you with me here? And if we want to change that, then we actually have to create a new path in the brain through thought, through action, through repetition, through persistence, through cultivating the feeling that goes with it. This is how we start to embody a new habit, a new practice, a new idea. And so when we look at what we're experiencing now, we can say, okay, what does it look like I have believed in order to bring this into my experience? And if I have believed that, and I still believe that, and I want to change my experience, maybe it's time to experiment with changing on the inside. So, here we want to move from where we are to where we want to go. And the question is, bless you, twice, how do we get from here? Are you still with us there, Tim? Excellent, okay, good. So how do we get from where we are to there, to where we want to go? Well, in the science of mind, we say that the change of consciousness requires the time and process necessary to grow into that new experience. And this is where our spiritual practices come in, and particularly the form of prayer we teach, which is spiritual mind treatment. That big name, spiritual mind treatment, is just a long name for our kind of affirmative prayer. And so with persistence and little tiny baby steps over time, with occasional rest, because you know when you're trying to do something new, if you do it constantly, eventually you get so tired of it that you just quit before you ever get to the goal. Anybody ever go on a weight loss program but never get to your goal? Be honest now, yes, okay, a few hands out there. And so what happens is we start off well with great enthusiasm and intention and determination, yes? And then at some point, we start to kind of fade away from that commitment. So we do need specific periods of rest where we're not trying to monitor every single thought we have and every single feeling we have, but to give ourselves enough practice when we notice that we're off track that we can readjust and come back to where we want to be. So essentially what we want to do is change the focus. Now, this fellow here is creating a new reality behind him by looking at all of these appearances here and shifting them through his own action, through his own thought. And so this is what we're talking about doing. Sometimes in my classes, I give the example of using an old-fashioned 35mm camera where you do the focusing yourself. Now, one of the things about that kind of a camera is you can choose the depth of field, which means what you're focused on. So you can have a short depth of field where what's right in the foreground is what's in focus for you. Or you can extend it outward into the middle range or into the distance where the foreground becomes fuzzy, or you can do a kind of infinity thing where everything is sort of in focus. And what we generally are doing is that what our experience is today, right now, what we're experiencing, that's the up-close short focus, and that's where our attention is. It's on all the conditions and circumstances, all the ups and downs. And what we want to do in consciousness is refocus the lens so that instead of being focused on what's right in front of us, we focus on the truth that's behind it. And the truth that's behind it is the spiritual truth of wholeness, of unlimited beingness, of having the opportunity to tap into that infinite mind that in its beingness is unlimited. So generally, I give the example that it's like we have a universal library card. And we have the ability to use that library card to check anything out of universal knowingness and consciousness that we want to. But what we tend to check out from that resource is what we're familiar with. So if you're an English speaker, you probably don't check out Russian literature from the library. If you are a Christian, you may not check out Buddhist material from the library. You might, but it's all available to you, but you only check out that which you're interested in or that which matches you right now. When you want to draw something new into your experience, you have to check something new out of the library. And you have to be aware that that resource is available to be checked out of the library. So if what we're experiencing isn't what we want, and we want to change the focal length of what we're looking at, then we not only need to think a different thought to begin to move that focus, but we also need to put ourselves into different circumstances. So back to that spiritual growth or personal growth training that I was in, one of the things they encouraged us to do in order to expand our prosperity consciousness or our consciousness of abundance was to go to places that we tended to think we didn't really belong. So, for example, in Seattle, there's a Four Seasons hotel and restaurant. And to me, at that time, that was not a place where I belonged. That was for people who were way up there. And so what we were encouraged to do was to go someplace like that into the restaurant, to sit down and have a lovely cup of coffee or a cup of soup or something small, and to take our time with it, to sit there and experience the atmosphere of the place and the flavor of the food and the feeling of the silver, and to claim it as being rightfully ours, that we were in the right place. And to notice and make space for the discomfort that somebody's going to catch me and throw me out because I don't really belong here. And so that began a journey for me of how do we lovingly expand our ability to receive good a little more. And a little more. You know, if you're learning to play a piano, for example, you play scales over and over and over again as part of your warm-up until your fingers get so familiar with those keys and that sequence and the speed that you get very, very, very good at it. And so when we want to embrace something new in our lives, then we have to take ourselves into a realm where we're not as familiar, it isn't quite comfortable, and we have to step into it gradually and keep practicing, keep repeating it. My mother made fabulous gravy. Everybody raved about her gravy. Now, I'm not a big gravy eater, so I didn't make it much. But my son, as a little boy, loved my mother's gravy. And so, after we moved to California, I decided one night I was going to make gravy with dinner. And I did. And so I served it, and my son was about 9, maybe, at the time, and I gave it to him and I said, well, what do you think? And my son, who was a very diplomatic, patient soul, he thought about it for a minute as he tasted it, and then he said, Mom, keep practicing. And I really appreciated the kindness with which he said that. And I said, you know, you don't have to eat it, honey, if you don't want to. And I left the gravy after that to my mother. I didn't go out of my way to get good at it. So I dare say if I were to do it today, it would be about the same as it was then. Because that process hasn't become familiar to me so that I feel my way into it, knowing that I know what I'm doing. And so this is true about the things that we want to include in our lives. Not everything is worth the time and effort that it takes to do something new. Not everything is worth the time and effort to us personally. So we have to choose what matters in order to go forward with that. And Ernest Holmes said this about the creative law and the way it works as it flows through us. He said, it's superstitious to believe that God will answer the prayer of one above another. Jesus said that God maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and the unjust. This is what I was saying a couple weeks ago about the law of gravity. It doesn't only hold down people who deserve it. And so the creative law, just like the kid putting the sandwich in the VCR, doesn't know who you are, doesn't realize that it's using your consciousness to create and doesn't care, doesn't know what's in your consciousness to be created and doesn't care. All it knows is to take what you've given it and make more of that. That's the mold. That's the mold. And so when we think about what we've got right now, it's important to recognize that it's more than just positive thinking. Maxwell Maltz wrote in his book, Psycho-Cybernetics, positive thinking cannot be used effectively as a patch or a crutch to the same old self-image. Once the concept of the self is changed, other things consistent with the new concept of self are accomplished easily and without strain. So we want to grow into it so that we're not trying to make a Herculean effort to shift. And Holmes said, our founder Ernest Holmes said in The Science of Mind, if one wishes to demonstrate prosperity, he must first have a consciousness of prosperity. If he wishes health, he must embody the idea of health. Now, it can be challenging to embody the idea of health when you're experiencing illness. But there is something that allows us to begin to shift into a larger sense of who we are in our fullness. And so when we do prayer, when we do spiritual, because if God is all there is, then spirit is the origin of all of it. Spiritual mind, because it's about the beliefs and feelings. Treatment, like a medical treatment would be. We give ourselves a treatment to heal that false thinking, that faulty belief system and the feelings that flow from it and the attitudes and behaviors that come out of that. So Holmes, in Lessons in Spiritual Mind Healing, said, spiritual mind healing is based upon the theory that every individual is perfect at his source. The source of every individual is pure, undifferentiated spirit. This spirit is not sick. Therefore, it does not need to be healed. In spiritual mind healing, the belief system alone needs to be changed, thus permitting a new flow of pure spirit, unhampered by any thought of restriction or pain. And what happens when we make these changes is that we become changed on the inside. And when we're changed on the inside, sometimes that is the healing. It may or may not change what's outside of us. The real healing may be on the inside. Sometimes it affects the inside and also the outside. It changes us and situations and other people on the outside. Even though we weren't trying to change all of them, we were just trying to change our perception, our experience, our interpretation of what's going on around us. So what's happening is we want to build the dream, not the nightmare. And so in order to do that, we first need to recognize that everything that we've done up until now in our lives, we've done because in some way we thought it would advance us. It would make us feel better. It would give us more power or be soothing or let us leave behind what felt painful. Does that make sense? Yes. And so it made sense to us at the time. It was what we did to bring more of what we thought would be helpful or good into our lives. And Maxwell Maltz says this too, which I really like. He says, there is within each one of us a life instinct, which is forever working toward health, happiness, and all that makes for more life for the individual. This life instinct works through you through what I call, and this is Maxwell Maltz speaking, the creative mechanism. So that would be what Ernest Holmes calls the creative law. And Maltz says, or when used correctly, the success mechanism built into each human being. And he goes on later in the book to give this example or this reference. He says, Émile Coué, the French pharmacist who astonished the world around 1920, so think about that for a minute, that's about 100 years ago, with the results he obtained with the power of suggestion, he insisted on the law of reversed effort. And this is what he said: when the will and the imagination are in conflict, the imagination invariably wins the day. And so he said, physical relaxation plays a key role in the dehypnotization process. So we're all hypnotized, in a sense, into believing whatever it is that we believe is how we are, or how the world is, or how other people are, or how different countries or races or religions are. And so he says this: physical relaxation plays a key role in the dehypnotization process. Our currently held beliefs were formed without effort. Our habits were formed in the same way. So what he's suggesting or recommending here is that as we're taking these steps toward change, we need to do it in a relatively easy way. That's why I say tiny baby steps into what's unfamiliar or uncomfortable, just a little bit at a time. Just a little bit at a time, so that it isn't too difficult, that's relatively flowing, and we can stay kind of relaxed in the process. And so we teach a number of techniques to assist us in claiming the dream. I love this image because this little boy down here, or a little girl, whoever this little person is standing up in the bedroom in the middle of the night looking out at all of this that's happening. And although the window is here, this child has all of this available. He can see what he can see through the window, but what is available is even more. And what's available is where his dreams live. And so when we want to bring a dream forward into reality, which is what we're doing when we're beginning to envision a larger life for ourselves, or a different life for ourselves, we can use some of these spiritual technologies to help us do that. And also, I highly recommend working with a practitioner. And the reason I say that is this: when we begin doing spiritual work for ourselves, often we need support or assistance to stay grounded, to stay focused on our intention, to keep persisting over time. The best way of losing weight for me is when I have to check in with somebody and weigh myself in front of them every week. Because I have to take ownership for what I have or haven't done in that week. Whereas if it's just me, I can make exceptions right, left, and center. You know, somebody's serving this magnificent chocolate something or other. Well, you know, I don't eat that all the time, so I'm going to have some of that. And if there are exceptions all the time, then that really becomes what my weight reflects, not what I think my intention is. But when I have to be responsible with somebody else, it helps hold me focused on what I actually want, which is not short-term, but long-term. Is this making sense so far? And so it's really helpful to have a practitioner work with us where they're doing the prayer for us instead of or in addition to us doing it for ourselves, because they're not, and I'm saying they because our practitioners, some of them are at the table up here at the practitioner table, they're not attached to our issue. So they're not worried about our issue. They're not obsessing over our issue. They don't get lost in the middle of the prayer worrying about the issue, which we may do. And so all of us can benefit from working with someone like our practitioners. We teach this form of affirmative prayer. In fact, I'm going to be teaching it really soon in my foundations class. And the prayer, I'll give you just a little hint of it because we do them all the time in the service. But the prayer is a 5-step flow that starts with God. Just God, not the problem. Just God. that which is not limited by our problem, that which is not confused, not worried. I mean, can you imagine an infinite going, wow, that's a big one. I'm not sure I really know what to do with that. Probably not. So the infinite, when we put our mind there, we put our mind on the part of that infinite that's completely free of the limitations that we think we're experiencing with our problem. And then, as we have recognized that, then we unify with it. We bring into our awareness that that is what we are made from. So that unlimited resource that we can check anything out of, we are that. Which also means that regardless of what we're experiencing in the moment, there is within us something that isn't limited by that experience. And we try that on. What would it feel like? What would it look like, sound like, smell like, if that were our experience? And from that place where we feel some element of that, we speak that truth as if it were already our experience right now. We claim it for ourselves. We essentially say into the creative law, yes, this is the truth about me. And when we get that really anchored in ourselves, then we're grateful. We're just grateful that that's the real spiritual truth. Now we're focused on the truth in the background of the appearance. And then we let it go. We let it go. Because now it's not our job to do anything about that. The creative law then begins to act on this new consciousness, this new idea that we're planting inside ourselves. And we can reinforce that with affirmations, which are those little statements that you find in Nourishing Thoughts, that little book you're going to get if you're here for the first time today. Simple, positive statements in the present, as if what you want is already in your experience. So we do that. We do visualization and visioning, and we do spiritual mind treatment, and we do study, and we do service, and we do giving and tithing, all these things as spiritual practices to help reinforce the deep truth of who we are in the way that we want to move forward into that dream, in the way that we want to embody the belief. Because the creative law always says yes to what you really hold as true. And so if you think that something is immovable in you, it's not. It's not. And the very radical idea that it's not immovable is the beginning of moving it. So when we come from this kind of affirmative prayer, it's not like we have faith in God someplace out there. We are speaking from the spiritual truth of the knowingness and faith of God in what is spiritually true. And when we hold to that in our prayer, in our practice, what's around us begins to come into sympathetic vibration with the new idea. And another way of saying that is it starts to show up in our thoughts and in our experiences, actually, in our lives. So when we change the focal length, we start to become our dream from the inside out. Now, our practitioners have taken, at a minimum, about 3.5 to 4 years of study before they become licensed practitioners. But finishing that is not enough. They have to make an application to our Centers for Spiritual Living, and then they have to do a written exam, and then they have to go in front of a panel and do an oral exam to show that they know how to do this. And they understand the theory behind it as well, so they can speak it in simple terms. So they've done all that, and then they get a license if they pass everything, and then every 2 years they have to renew their license. So these folks who are practitioners, they put a lot into this already. and they are worthy of your trust. So I encourage you to come to them, because this is what they do. In Pray and Prosper, Holmes says, spiritual communion is deeper than intellectual perception. The prayer of the intellect may be perfect in form, but this form must be warmed and colored by feeling and conviction. Prayer is a thing of thought and feeling, and therefore is mind in action. And I'll say this last bit from Maxwell Maltz, and then I have a little story I want to share with you to wrap up today. Maxwell Maltz, this is on page 25 in Psycho-Cybernetics, he says, if you were engineered for success and happiness, then the old picture of yourself as unworthy of happiness, of a person who was meant to fail, Charlie Brown, must be an error. It doesn't matter how you got the idea or where it came from. But if you have accepted an idea and you are firmly convinced that the idea is true, it has the same power over you as the hypnotist's words have over the hypnotized subject. So some of our hypnosis is self-hypnosis, and some of it has come from our families, the world we live in, the church we grew up in, who our friends were, yada yada. This is an interesting story that comes from one of Deepak Chopra's books. In his brilliant book of essays on surgery, Mortal Lessons, Richard Seltzer recalls one patient of his, a short-order cook named Joe Riker, who always showed up for his weekly appointments wearing a fedora. Now, this is not actually Joe Riker, but it occurred to me that some of you might not know what a fedora is. So, beneath the hat was hidden a terrible secret. In the middle of his head, a tumor had progressively worked its way through the skin, the skull bones, and the three tough outer layers of the brain, leaving a gaping hole. Through it, the actual moist tissue of the brain could now be seen. Seltzer's reaction to this disturbing sight was not horror, but urgent compassion. And this is what Seltzer says. I would gaze then upon Joe Riker, how dignified he was, as though the tumor had given him a grace that a lifetime of good health had not bestowed. Joe, I say, let's get rid of it. Cut out the bad part, put in a metal plate, and you're cured. And I would wait. No operation, says Joe. I try again. What do you mean no operation? You're going to get meningitis any day now and die. That thing is going to get in your brain. I think of it devouring the man's dreams and memories. I wonder where they are. The surgeon knows all parts of the brain, but he does not know his patient's dreams and memories. No operation, says Joe. You give me a headache, I say, and we smile. Not because the joke is funny anymore, but because we have got something between us, like a secret. So week after week, for 6 months, Seltzer had no choice but to apply fresh dressings and set the next weekly appointment, always for Thursday at 4 o'clock. And then, one day, Joe missed his appointment and did not return. After a month, Seltzer drove to the diner in New Haven where Joe worked and found him behind the counter, still wearing his fedora. And when he demanded to examine him, Joe nervously refused. But he agreed to meet Seltzer at his office that Thursday. He showed up late for his appointment. Take off your hat, I say. And he knows by my voice that I'm not happy. He does, though, raise it straight up with both hands, the way he always does, and I see that the wound is healed. Where there once had been a bitten-out excavation, there is now a fragile bridge of shiny new skin. What happened? I manage. You mean that? He points to the top of his head. Oh, well, he says. The wife's sister, she went to France and brought me a bottle of water from Lourdes. I've been washing it out with that for a month. Holy water, I said? Yeah, says Joe, holy water. Off and on after that, Seltzer would see Joe at the diner looking completely ordinary, not at all like a fleshy garden of miracles, as Seltzer had dubbed him. There seemed to be no change at all in Joe's shuffling walk or his matter-of-fact manner. Perhaps the only change is just the sly wink with which he greets me, as though to signal that we have shared something furtive. Could such a man, I think as I sip my coffee, could such a man have felt the brush of wings? When we have a dream, it lives in us in such a way that when we nourish it, when we dream over it in a positive way, not in a way that says, I'm frustrated because I can never have that, but in a way that invites it, that begins to change our focus to the reality of it in the spiritual realm, and the fact that it exists in us already as a seed. When we begin to shift our focus like that, what begins to show up for us in our lives are the resources that match that dream, that vision. So what are you dreaming today? What is it that you want to expand into? What is it that you want to become and embody? What is the more that's waiting for you, that's planted inside of you? I can't answer that, but you can. So let's ask the practitioners now to surround the room so we can go into consciousness to invite, through prayer, I'm going to do a spiritual mind treatment right now, through prayer, that new truth into our experience. And by the way, some of our practitioners have been licensed for more than 20 years, which means that for at least that 20 years, every 2 years, they've been doing their licensing renewals, which means additional education, additional practices, and participation. So they're joining me in consciousness in knowing this for all of us together. So I invite you to be receptive, to open your receptors to the possibility right now. And so in this moment, I turn my attention to what is true, to what is unchanging and deep behind everything that exists. And it is the truth of wholeness, of creativity, of eternal, endless variety and possibilities. And I step into that awareness knowing that I am made from that beingness, from that unlimited wellspring of creativity and possibilities. And this vibration that exists everywhere is the perfect manifestation of love as everything that shows up. It is the overflow of love coming from the heart of the infinite. And it is me, the truth of me. And it is the truth of everyone in this place and of all that is. So right now in this moment, I know and claim for myself and for all of us that this deeper truth is bubbling up into awareness, bubbling up into my experience, into my thoughts and feelings, into my choices, into my expansion of good. And this is true for all of us, that as this deeper truth becomes more and more in focus, this transformation is taking place already. Because I can imagine it, I know that it's already begun. Because the law always says yes. So I claim what is imagined, and I take a moment to simply feel it as my expanded, transformed being and truth. As we breathe into that, as we accept that now, I am grateful to know that this is always the unchanging truth of our being. And I release this prayer into the creative law of mind and spirit, where it is acted upon immediately and drawn into form and being and experience. I let it go into the divine, where it already is the truth, because it always has been so in the unchanging. And so I let it go, and I relax, and I simply let it be. And together we say, and so it is. And so it is. Namaste.